Good evening. Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me and see me. Hello. If you could just let me know you can see my slides, hear me. Okay, and everything is working as it should. Yeah, awesome. And just to remind you that when you write to host and panelists, you're writing just to me. And if you're writing to everyone, on the blue little click down just above where you are typing, you'll see that it will say host and panelists and everyone. And you can choose how to share your responses. So welcome to session 4 of compassionate communication this week of Raise Resilience. And we're going to sort of bring, it's like a story what I'm telling. Okay, so it's all part of this, like we need to have thought about what we did last week to sort of add on. So if you haven't seen the recording or logged in last session, I'm going to be just doing a quick, I'm going to be doing a recap of the skills that we've covered so far so that we can like continue this story. So don't worry if you haven't had the chance to do that yet. But as always, beginning of each session, we always have a opportunity for you guys to get involved and ask questions. So please feel free now to just reflect on where we've come from. Maybe just record like a key thing that you remember, like that sort of like sticks out for you so far. What's the sort of your key message? Because again, like sharing that is a really, really excellent way of like thinking about what other people have sort of taken home and what they're holding on to. And maybe if you have a question, you can ask a question. But if you don't have a question, just like a key thing that's a key message that you're holding on to that we've covered so far is a good sort of like starting point to get us all on the same page. Lovely. Thank you, Terry. So your sort of key takeaway so far is like the check-in that you're having at bedtime. What went well, what wasn't so good. Yeah, so you're using the what questions instead of like, how was your day? We're going more specific into, you know, what was, tell me one thing that was really great today. Can you tell me a time in your day that didn't feel so great? Can you tell me about it? So we're getting them to like unpick and communicate. Yeah, thank you for that, Teresa. How much time I spend doing versus being has really stuck with me. Yeah, me too. Like that's always on my mind. That concept of like when I sort of sit down, I realize how much I've just been on autopilot and just been like powering through my to-do list, and how little I've just sort of just paused and checked in with myself, checked in with my children, and so the more aware that we get into that autopilot, the more aware we can like take action to put in that 30 seconds or that minute or whatever we can in the day to break it up a bit. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, nothing's coming up. I'm still would respond and love to hear your comments. But as they're not coming up right now, I will start with the recap then. So what we've done is we've looked at this idea that the way we think has an effect on how we feel and how we behave. Okay. And we've covered two types of beliefs. We've looked at when we go into the why beliefs, where we go into like the causes of an activating event, the causes of the thing that happened, right? And we try and justify it. So we go back in time and we say why, you know, what the reasons were, and we give reasons for the event. And the other type of belief we've examined is the what next beliefs. And that's when we go into the future and we think about the implications of this event. And we go, well, if that happens, then that, and then that might happen, and then that, and we sort of like play it into the future. So it's a sort of going back or forward, right, in terms of what happens in our head when an activating event takes place. Okay. And we focus on this idea that we're not suggesting here that anything is about like, you know, changing our beliefs like fully and trying to like wipe them away or suggest they're wrong. We're here to sort of like acknowledge that we may have some biases in our thinking. Okay. So what skills did we learn based on those two different beliefs? Okay, so the skills that we've gone over is this idea that when we go into the the justification of the event, and we go into it's because of this, it's because of this, it's because of this in our head, we can use the ABC model, right? So we can ABC it when we have the why beliefs. Okay, and we can go, okay, so let's identify what beliefs are coming up for me here. Which gremlins are at play for me at most often? Start to see if there's any patterns, right? So it might be that you're doing a lot of me gremlin, where you're doing a lot of internalization and blame. Or it might be that you're doing a lot of like these always statements and generalizing to different scenarios and suggesting it's permanent, right? When we put labels on things, we hold in our belief that that thing is permanent. And so what we've examined to have a go at like thinking about those thoughts is to reframe that belief using evidence. So looking for evidence to go against it, using really like coaching questions, really, checking for accuracy and thinking about being flexible in our thinking. And we can be flexible in our thinking when we realize how many mistakes we make or how poor our brain is at, you know, doing this work. And the more we sort of like humbly go, oh yeah, well, maybe I'm not fully, you know, right. Or maybe there's an error there in the way I interpreted that. Let me have a look at it. And remembering that because we have the confirmation bias, so remembering the confirmation bias is where we seek to like confirm what we already believe. And if we make a belief, like we know that when we judge somebody for the first time, it takes us 7 seconds to make a judgment of someone, and we just use gut instinct. So if we're doing that, and then we stick by it and we ignore information in our environment that goes against what we originally, you know, what goes against our original thought of whatever we like held on to. So remembering that whatever knowledge or whatever ways that we're reframing these gremlins, it has to be just as powerful and just as like strong to be able to overcome that bias. And remembering that all of this requires so much compassion for ourselves and others, because we are sort of re-examining the way we think about something, which is for most adults, I think, you know, unless you've actually studied this sort of thing, is totally new, which is why we at Bounce Forward are so keen to get kids, you know, thinking about this really young, right? That actually a thought is a thought, and it's not maybe so, you know, so true all the time. And therefore, the idea is that we're thinking about this building an optimistic muscle, right? So by having these skills of being able to think about our thinking, it allows us to build a muscle, because it is a muscle, because we practice something and it strengthens it. So the more we do this, the better we become at like challenging our thinking and re-examining the situation. And basically what we're saying here is problem solving, right? Because we do this ABC when we don't like the way we feel and the way we behave. Otherwise, there's no need to go through your beliefs. There's no need to challenge your beliefs if you're really fine or content with the way you feel and the way you behave. Okay. And so we also have learned a skill when we do a lot of catastrophizing and we're spiraling into the future, that we need to make sure that we use the calming strategies, remembering the brain science of the idea that when we are in a moment of a big emotion, so for example, with why beliefs, it might be that you're feeling really, really, really rubbish about yourself and so low that you can't really, you're finding this whole concept of like writing down your thoughts too difficult. And that's because your lid has flipped and you're not able to concentrate and close this lid. Okay, so we close the lid by doing calming strategies. So remembering that whenever our thoughts spiral or they go into like really like low thoughts, low mood, then we need to calm the body and to be able to calm the mind so that we can focus on problem solving strategies, which would be using ABC or the wobble technique, where we write down the worst case scenario, best case scenario, and then the more middle ground. Okay. Any questions on what we've done so far? I realise I am going much faster than you would be able to write. So please, I'm just going to pause a second just in case anybody did have a question. No, very quiet this evening, everybody. Okay, that's fine. I'm just checking in with you that you don't have any questions about what we've done so far. Okay, so we're now just going to link this to our communication and how it can affect our relationships, because one person's consequence can be another person's activating event. Okay, and what I mean by that, if you think about like this, if your daughter does really bad in a test, and they, in their ABC, that's their activating event, and their beliefs are I'm a failure, and that they believe they're rubbish and there's no way that they can ever improve. And then their consequence is to feel really low, withdraw, and their behavior is to give up and stop trying, right? And therefore they don't do their homework and they don't bother putting any effort into their work. That is then potentially a parent's activating event, right? So the activating event for the parent is when their child doesn't do their homework. And then their beliefs are my child is lazy and needs like constant nagging and is going to get really behind and blah, 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 whatever beliefs we might have there. And then the consequence for the parent is to feel annoyed and sharp and then really angry with their daughter. And then we go round and round and round and round and round and round. Okay. So we can see that these cycles can affect relationships and affect the way we communicate. Okay, because that belief that you have of your daughter being lazy is affecting the way you communicate with her, because you've decided that it's because she's lazy and not because she's got, she's suffering from a problem of feeling really like lack of worth, but it's because she's lazy. And so the two things aren't connected. Okay, so we can also break down our communication, not only when one person's consequence is another person's activating event, but also when we stop listening with empathy. And often we stop listening with empathy when, our beliefs don't match. We just sort of have these beliefs and we're so stuck in these beliefs that we forget that we might actually be perceiving the whole thing wrong, right? Or without like validation or connection to our children. Okay. And I'm going to talk a bit more about listening with empathy in today's session. So we could also lack communication when our thinking is inaccurate and fixed. Again, going back to this first point about it related to the ABC model and how you can have really fixed thinking. For example, the thought, my daughter is lazy. Right? It's a fixed gremlin, it's a label, it's an always statement, right? And therefore, because we've got this fixed belief that she's lazy, therefore we get angry because she doesn't do her homework. Okay. And then the last one is also when we have high expectations and ideals, right? When we have an expectation of what we think or what we expect our children to do and live up to, and they don't, it really affects communication because we feel let down, and it then affects how, if their behavior affects our beliefs about ourselves and them, right? So it's like all interwoven. So high expectations have a big impact. And for example, when a child does something that you're really sort of shocked by and you don't approve of, so we can things like we know that suggesting that they might really enjoy art when actually you think they should be a doctor can have a really big impact on communication because they've got one view and you've got another view. Okay, so let's look at an ABC together. Right, so we've got an ABC here of an activating event that's quite typical of parents, right? That when you see your children's room being really untidy, we interpret that event, right? We interpret that in certain ways, and we potentially might say something like, she's so lazy, she doesn't do anything to help. I have to do everything around here. Okay, and with those statements leads to feeling angry and resentful, nagging and shouting, and having a bad evening. Okay, and so what happens next? It will repeat, right? And so because we've now got this label that she doesn't do anything and you have to do everything for her, and that's because she's lazy, it then becomes a difficult it becomes difficult in the relationship. So are these statements, are these beliefs, I'm not saying whether they're true or not, we're not judging whether they're true or not, but are they helpful or hindering for communication? I'll just ask that question again. So are these thoughts, she is so lazy, she doesn't do anything to help, I have to do everything around here, are they helpful or hindering for communication? Oh, it's interesting you say if they're said in that way, they're not helpful. What do you mean by that? If they're said in a different way, how would it be helpful? Suggesting that. Hindering. Yeah, so it's not helpful, it's labeling them or the behavior. Okay, so let's try and label it, right? So we did a session on gremlins. You can have the meaning but word it differently. Okay. Interesting. Okay, I'd like to see how you could word it differently to make it helpful. And yeah, really interesting, because I suppose what you're saying there is just reframe it or rethink it, or, you know, work on those statements. Okay, let's try this. So first of all, let's label the gremlins here. What gremlins are at play? So you could help me more. Yeah, because we're sort of changing it from, so what you're doing is identifying that there's a problem in the wording of this belief, this thought that pops into my head when my child doesn't tidy their room. Okay, these are let's just go with this, right? These are my thoughts that pop into my head and how I then reflect upon and what I say to myself, my self-talk, when my child doesn't tidy her room. And then afterwards I get angry with her, shout at her, round her, or whatever I might do. And it you know, doesn't improve our communication. We just keep on going round and round in circles. Okay. So yeah, there's an exaggeration. I like the word exaggeration, but using the gremlins that so remember the gremlins, it was like me, them, always, everything. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got definitely an always and an everything gremlin in these statements, right? Because she is so lazy is a statement that suggests is a permanent, you know, trait of a person that doesn't change. She is lazy, right? It's not that she didn't pick up her clothes on this occasion in this specific moment. It's a trait of her character, therefore permanent, right? So we're using there's a permanence there to that statement, and she doesn't do anything to help. Again, there's this like really strong permanence and generalization going on there. We're not talking about a specific, you know, in our head, we're not like bringing our thoughts to a particular moment. We are generalizing across different scenarios and suggesting that this thing that she does is constant. I have to do everything around here, suggesting she does nothing, right? Me, again, this like real big permanence, everything always going on in these statements, okay? So what we're trying to do here is like acknowledge that, and without thinking about the actual gremlins, you're absolutely right, Christina, that actually it's an exaggeration. It's exactly it. So what we need to do is we need to change the language or change the way that it's written to reframe so that it's not permanent, it's not generalized, and it's not so exaggerated, right? So what we can do is we can make it specific and not attack on a character, and we can make it something that's not so permanent. Okay, so we might say something like, I know, as so you could help me more, but the statements about, so this is you justifying the room not being cleaned. So you might then like talk about, okay, so she has a lot going on at the moment, and this week her room has been less tidy than normal than the other week. Okay, and just by my reframing it based on acknowledging the fact that she's having a difficult time right now, I've acknowledged that it's not something that's literally every single day. And I might then ask myself questions like, well, does she put her dish plate in the dishwasher? Is she doing any other help in the house? Does she put her laundry away? I mean, lots of other things that you could question and ask yourself to suggest that she doesn't do anything. Does she help her siblings? Does she, do you ask her, does she help when you ask her to do something or support you in technology because kids are so much better than us at it, so on and so forth, right? And that we're just using questions and evidence and bringing up different ways and thoughts to reframe this thinking, okay? Because we've acknowledged that it's hindering for our communication. And we only do this when we don't like the way we feel and we don't like the way we behave. So we might be just constantly getting stuck in a rut with like constant arguments between you and your son about tidying his room, okay? And so here's where we start to then examine it, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so now thinking about this idea of like using empathy as a skill or as a tool to help us with our communication. And there's this lovely, lovely video clip. It's about 3 minutes from Brené Brown, one of my heroes. Absolute incredible speaker. If you haven't ever seen any of her TED Talks, please Google her, Brené Brown. That's B-R-E-N-E Brown, on the power of vulnerability, and all the other things that she talks about. She's amazing. So here's her little clip to explain the difference between empathy over sympathy.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversation is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So it's not the words, it's the connection, right? It's not the response, it's the connection. And this is what we all actually crave when we're not feeling, you know, when we share something, we don't want it to be fixed. We don't want it to, for someone to just shush it away. We want to be seen and we want to be heard. Okay. And so communication can be really, really improved when we listen with empathy. Okay. So what we can show, what we know from research and examining all of this sort of work is that what you see and hear can often can give you a flavor of their beliefs, of what's sitting behind it. Okay. But it's like trying to unpick and find that suggesting that, you know, people don't act out for no reason, right? We're not, this approach comes from a trauma-informed approach that suggests that we don't misbehave because we're a bad kid, right? There is no misbehavior. Actually, misbehavior is just a signal and a sign for a need and a belief that hasn't been recognized or met or understood. Okay, so challenging behavior or difficult behavior is like trying to sort of examine what's going on for them. There's always like a reason behind a behavior, is what I'm trying to say here, which is something that we as a society don't really do well at, right? If you think about we as a society and how we act, and if you think about the school system, you know, we don't use this approach, and we should be, right? And we hope that this, you know, this is going to be a new educational revolution at some point, that we stop just punishing behaviors that, you know, external behaviors, and try and like support children and adults in finding out what was going on for them to understand the behavior, rather than just, you know, putting in consequences, which we know from the research don't actually change behavior, right? So you know, listening with empathy is such a more effective tool to supporting our children than dishing out consequences, because what we crave is to feel seen and heard. Okay, so for example, they're anxious or agitated, something, you know, in terms of their beliefs, something bad or dangerous is happening for them, right? It's about perception, about how we interpret things. You may have a different interpretation of what's going on for them, but that's your interpretation, that's your belief, right? And we have to acknowledge that everybody thinks differently, and to accept that people think differently, and to validate that, right? So feeling embarrassed, they feel not as good as other people or meeting the required standards. So what I'm saying here is that we need to seek to understand the beliefs that sit behind behavior. Any thoughts on that? It's hard. It's hard to do. It's and in a way, what we're like, going back to what Brené Brown said, it's like meeting the person at the emotion rather than trying to fix it. So your child comes home and says something like, I haven't got, nobody's playing with me, and nobody likes me, right? Often our response is to try and fix it, or like, or sort of go, oh, that's okay, George really likes, George likes you. Yeah, because what we're doing there is, yes, lovely, difficult not to judge or take sides. It's so hard to hold that judgment back or to try and solve the problem by suggesting what to do. Right? Oh, tomorrow just go and do and you'll feel better. I'm sure you'll be fine. And actually, that leaves the child or adult, whoever told you that information, being alone in that emotion, because we haven't met them at the emotion. All we've done is dismiss it, and we've tried to fix it, and we've judged it. Okay, it's really hard to do, and something that I really work on all the time, and really conscious of how often it just slips out of my tongue, and how I have to like pull that back in. So my new phrase is, how does that make you feel? Okay, how does that make you feel? Instead of, oh my goodness, that's all, judge. That's terrible. I can't believe, and we do it all the time. And so I try to say something like, so how does that make you feel? Tell me more. Right? I'm just getting them to open up and share more of what's going on for them without adding in my take on something. Really hard to do. Oops. And as we sort of slightly touched on before, using the what question, right? The unsaid beliefs. We want to find what these unsaid beliefs are. And to find these unsaid beliefs, we just need to open up the dialogue more. What is the most upsetting part of that for you? What does that mean to you? What is the worst part of that for you? Because if I say, but why are you upset? But why? Why are you upset? We naturally become defensive. We go, but, because, and we have to justify ourselves when we use the why question. When we use the what question, what was the most upsetting part? Tell me more. What does it mean for you? You can see that these phrases don't have judgment in it. These phrases help the person continue the story and opening up more and delving into it to find out what is that real belief that's sitting there for me. And it might be, once you say something like, your child says, nobody plays with me. Well, what does that mean to you? Well, it means that I'm a loner and I feel like a loser, right? There you go. You've picked up, like, by doing that, it's something that you're like drawing on what their belief is about themselves, right? In that moment, because they've told you something, you've asked a what question, and they've opened up more, and you've got to understand what beliefs are going on for them. So really, someone sharing with me personally that saying you need to have a really clear understanding of emotions, which is something to work on. I'm slightly unclear what you mean by that. As you meet, like, the person as the parent has to have a real clear understanding of emotions to be able to do this work. Is that what you mean? Because I think that, it's all work in progress. We're all working in progress. But what we're trying to say here, and what we're, all I'm saying here is that to help with communication, use the what question to find the beliefs. And you're absolutely right. Yeah. The more we understand emotions, the more we start to reflect on our own emotions, delve into emotions, the easier it becomes. Again, work in progress, because we as adults were never brought up like this. I mean, I'm be really surprised if any of you had any sort of work on this in your childhood. I definitely didn't. So it's like teaching ourselves before we can help our children, in a way, is what you're saying there. And I totally hear you and totally agree with you. It's like you've got to sort of work on it and understand it for you, to understand how, how that sits for you. yeah, and it is work in progress. It's never perfect. It doesn't just, suddenly one day you go, oh yeah, I really cracked this communication, finding out about their beliefs and where I can speak to my children. It's never like that, right? And as the lid flips up and down during the day, during the week, you're going to be better at what sometimes than others. Okay. But something to just hold on to is when you feel you're struggling with your child in figuring out what's going on, seek to find the beliefs behind their behavior. How do you do that? Use the what questions. I hope that makes sense. And other tips to sort of draw out and improve our communication is to think about talking sideways. Research has looked into this and found that this is effective for all, but most effective for males. And what I mean by that is think about the times when you have the most deep and meaningful conversations. Where are you? Where are you? When your child has like shared something with you, where are you? What are you doing? Yeah, Louise says in the car. Any others? Yeah. Most of the time, it's not when we're face to face looking at each other. So typical sort of old style, yeah, walking. So you're side by side, right? This talking sideways thing, you might be lying on the bed next to each other. Or if you're at home, you're probably doing an activity, engaged in something, and then it comes up, right? And you see, I just remember, like, the image for me is like the old school films or just general films where, you sit down for dinner and it's like, so everybody, tell me about your day, and you get this like, oh, we need to have a family meeting about something. And then it's like face to face and you're trying to get them to like open up about something. And you in that intimidating feeling of sitting across the table from someone, it doesn't work, right? Tables create a barrier. One, face to face, again, it doesn't have that same feeling of just feeling like you can open up. So we know from research that if you want to have those, to encourage those difficult conversations, use parallel sideways stuff to aid that. Okay. So we've done a lot talking about the difficult conversations, right? How to improve conversation, how to improve our communication when it's difficult, right? But we also need to think about how we respond to the good stuff, okay? How we respond to when our child or our partner or our friend, this is general like communication skills here, when they share something with us about something that they've enjoyed and that they're really happy about, how do we respond? And this is absolutely fascinating. I have this up on my fridge to remind me and my partner about this all the time, because it's just about like being more aware again of how poorly we communicate sometimes, right? When we're all, especially when we're in that doing mode of like, and your child comes over and it's like, I did this, look what I did. And they show you something, you go, lovely, darling. And you carry on, right? So thinking about, obviously, we're not saying every single every type of response has to be this perfect response, but just being more aware that the way we respond can be improved, right? And let's go through this. So we can respond in 4 different ways. And this comes from Shelley Gable's work on improving social connections and positive emotions, right? And so they found that if you use active constructive communication, you will really enhance your communication and your relationships. Okay, so here's the different ways of responding. And let's use an example of your child comes to tell you that they've got the highest score on their online game that they've been playing for a long time. I got the highest score, I got such an amazing score. How do we respond? If we respond in a passive destructive way, it would be non-communicative, unresponsive and negative. And so it would be really not really responding at all. You might just sort of look at them and walk out, and then you might go and carry on doing what you're doing, right? Passive and destructive. Then we've got passive constructive, right? So it's supportive, but non-communicative, positive, with few words and little emotional expression. Okay, and so you might be like, oh, brilliant, darling, super, that's it. Okay, that's my one. I often do that one. Active destructive, vocally and enthusiastically negative or distracting, pointing out the downsides and being sarcastic. This is my partner, and he, like, I literally circle this and I'm like, you doing the active destructive communication style again? He does not like, but the point is that the more aware he is that he's doing it, the better. So it might be something like, oh, if you put on all that time to do your schoolwork, you would be top of the class by now, wouldn't you? Something like that, right? And then active constructive, communicative, supportive and validating, displaying pleasure and support and asking questions. Okay, so if it was like, it's interesting when we think about asking questions about how we can help the person that we're talking to relive that experience. Okay, so if we say something like, did you enjoy it? And they go, yeah, we've cut down the conversation. Although it was a lovely attempt to engage them in, asking some questions. Or what score did you get? 5. Again, it's called closed-ended question because it just gives a one word response. So what we want to do is try and use open-ended questions to help them relive and replay the joy and the excitement, to share that joy and excitement with you. Okay, so the best way to do that is to ask open-ended questions. So it might be something like, what did you have to do? Tell me more. What does it mean to you? What does the game involve? What was the best part of that for you? So many different ways of using open questions, but thinking about that the way that they answer has to be not just one word. And that will continue to relive the beauty of the moment for them. Okay. Okay, let's have just a little go together. So let's give you another example and let's see if you guys can have a go. Okay, so here's your example. So your partner comes over to you and says, oh, guess what? I had a really good conversation with our child. How do you respond? Passive destructive, what would you say? Are you still there? Yeah. Yeah, you might say, yeah, good. You don't really acknowledge it. You sort of just look up, might just look up and look down again and just nod your head, maybe. Okay, passive constructive. Brilliant. Yeah. Great, well done you. Just simple, like, yeah, great. And that's all we do. Okay, what about active destructive? Yeah, about time. And active constructive, what questions might you ask? What did you talk about? Tell me more. What was the best part of that for you? What does it mean to you? Nice. Excellent. Okay, so tips for being active constructive in your response is to be in the moment and fully listen, right? Avoid early jump-ins. We do it all the time. Often when we're listening, we're already preparing our response before the person's actually finished. So be aware that we do that naturally. It's just normal human behavior. It's not you being like a poor listener, but knowing that we do it means that we can be more aware to sort of pause and let them finish and give them time. Be genuine and authentic. Ask questions to understand. This is that, that going back to that thing about how to respond even to when they come up with, when they tell you about a problem. Try and ask lots of questions to understand before you offer advice, and maybe even ask if they want the advice. That's often we sort of love to give it, thinking it's like what people need or what people want. But it would be so nice to actually, ask, do you want my advice, or are you just looking for validation and to be able to express yourself and someone to listen to you? Give the person a chance to relive the experience in detail. That's about asking the open questions, and ask about things that are important to them. So even if they don't come to you and tell you about something really exciting for them, maybe you can think about, okay, for them, computer games is really important to them. I have no interest in computer games, but I'm going to try and engage in a conversation about it to see if I could relive an experience with my child to improve our communication. So I might ask them about the game they're playing and why they love it and what's going on for them and where they're at and who they're playing with and so on and so forth. So this week, we're going to be sending you some resources as usual in 3 different levels. An observation test, being a detective, the wobble skill, which we learned last time, the safe space, which is a lovely calming activity to bring to mind a place in your mind that you feel really the safest at, and it's like it's a meditation, to go through, and a visualization, to go through with your children. And being a detective is thinking about an observation test is just like introducing this concept that the way we think affects the way we feel and the way we behave. So it's like thinking about how we might, be a detective to actually understand that different people have different thoughts to us, and noticing that really does have an effect on how we then feel and how we then behave. And our disclaimer is always that you know your children best, so please choose the activities you think suit them and the levels. And we now have 5 minutes to just reflect and ask any questions. And so what we suggest that you practice this week is active constructive responding, thinking about this idea of like, okay, for me, I do for myself and my family, I attempt to do one once a week engage in a really detailed conversation about something that they enjoy, or something that they've done at school, something that they're telling me about. And I might, you know, if I'm really tired and I've noticed I've not done it all week, naturally, I might try and like instigate it, because I've noticed that I've been quite poor at listening. And notice how that affects your relationship, right? Because going back to this idea that the more we validate, the more we feel seen and heard, the more our relationships will improve, because that is what we want and crave. Okay, yeah, so any thoughts, questions, comments, anything, you know, what's your take-home messages from today's session? Oh, I love that, Christina. Active listening and empathy are difficult skills, but can be learnt. Yes. Looking forward to trying communicating with open-ended questions and getting to know more about them again. Awesome. So remember, the questions that we ask need to have the response. So it's not just a one-word answer, but it engages them in open dialogue. I love it. Wonderful, guys. So thanks some of you for writing in. It's really good to do that, because it's like useful for other people to read other people's summaries and for you to do it for yourself. Thanks so much, everybody, for signing in today. I will see you for session 5 next week.